Hey guys, Zachary Shaheen here with another video tutorial from 3D Creations for Beginners. Now, because of the recent news with the New Horizons space probe that was launched a very long time ago that has finally done its Pluto flyby, I thought it would be pretty cool if we made our own little space probe that we could send out into deep space. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to start by deleting this cube, as usual. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is make the kind of body or core for the probe. So we're going to make a new cylinder. Now usually we start out with 32 vertices, but actually we're going to lower this amount all the way down to just 6 vertices. So now we have this shape. Okay, so if you remember, the New Horizons probe is this kind of triangular, almost pizza-like shape. So that's what we're going to be making. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of pinch these two vertices together. So what we're going to do is just go into edit mode and then select them. And then we're going to want to change our tools from the move tool over to the scale tool right down here. Now let's go ahead and kind of squeeze that in. There we go. Okay, very good. Now let's go ahead and rotate this. And we want to rotate it so this edge right here is going to be straight across. Okay, once we've done that, now let's go ahead and select the top two vertices. Grab the scale tool and push that in. Alright, now one more time, we're going to take this object and we're going to rotate it so this big flat piece right here is going straight across. Very good. Now select the top vertices and pinch them in like that. Okay, there we go. The next thing we need to do is kind of flatten this shape down a little bit. So let's go ahead and look at it from the side view. Select the bottom vertices, and we are just going to grab the move tool and move that up and make it a thinner shape, just like that. Now let's go ahead and put the origin in the center of the object. So we're going to set origin to geometry. And then we are going to go ahead and move this to the center of the grid. So we're going to press Shift S. We're going to put the cursor to the center, and then one more time, Shift S, selection of cursor. Now it is in the center of the grid. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is make the high gain antenna, which is the big dish on top of the spacecraft. So, Shift A, and we are going to create a new circle. The next thing that we're going to want to do is go into edit mode. Make sure that all the vertices are selected and press E to extrude. And we're going to right click. We're going to press S to scale it, and we're going to scale it down a bit. Okay, now when we have these middle vertices selected, what we're going to do is we are going to move them down a bit. Just like that. Now we're going to do that one more time. We're going to press E to extrude, and then we're going to right click, scale it in a bit more. And now what we're going to do is we're going to push these down a little bit more, but not quite as sharp as an angle as we did for the first time. Just like that. There we go. Okay, so one more time we're going to extrude with E, right click, scale in, and we're going to scale it so there is just kind of a little circle left in the middle. And maybe push that down just a little bit more. Now we're going to press F to put a face across there. Okay, so here is the basic shape of the dish. Now let's go ahead and place it in the correct spot on the probe. Maybe we can scale that down a little bit, make it a little smaller. Now inside the dish there's a little antenna or a little transmitter, so we're actually going to build that. So what we're going to do is we're going to E to extrude, pull that out just a little bit. Now we want this to kind of go up and shrink at the same time, so what we're going to do is we're going to extrude again and then right click. We're going to scale this down before we pull it out. Now we're going to extrude again a little bit. Once again, E to extrude, right click, S to scale it down. And now let's extrude it just a little bit more. There we go, so now we kind of have that transmitter. Let's do one more. So extrude, right click, scale, extrude again. Okay, so now once we have that in place, we're going to start building some of the components that are on the spacecraft. Now, New Horizons was so far away from the sun, it couldn't really use a solar panel, so it needed to use a nuclear reactor on the side of the probe. So let's build our own nuclear reactor. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is create a cylinder. Now, we need to put the amount of vertices back to 32. I'm actually going to move this to a new layer so we can work with just this object. So I'm going to press M and then select the bottom layer here. And now we can switch down to that layer and we can only see that object. I'm just going to go ahead and line that up in the center. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to put a series of planes that are kind of cutting through the object. So we're going to make a new plane, line it up here in the middle of the cylinder. Let's go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees. Now we just need to kind of play with it and make sure that it is the same height as the cylinder. So let's go into edit mode, pull that up. Select this bottom bit right here, move that down. Alright, so let's go ahead and put it in the middle of the cylinder, make sure that it is the same size width-wise, and then let's go ahead and grab the scale tool and pull it out a little bit. Alright, the next step is pretty simple. All we have to do is duplicate the one plane that we made with Shift D. We just need to rotate it here another 90 degrees. Next, let's go ahead and select both of the planes by holding Shift right-clicking and then click Join, so it's going to make them into one object. Now we can duplicate them again, and we're going to rotate it by 45 degrees. Okay, now the last step is we're going to smooth this cylinder out, so we're going to click on Smooth Shading, and then we're going to add the Edge Split modifier. Okay, there's our nuclear reactor. Now I do want to combine all of these objects and make them one piece of geometry. Before we do that, I actually have to apply the modifier that I put on. Now let's go ahead and select all of the objects, and now click Join. Now this is just one object. Let's go ahead and move it back into the scene with the probe core and the dish. So, going to go back to that layer, click M to move it to the top layer. Alright, there we go. Scale that down. Now let's go ahead and put it in place. We're going to want to rotate this on its side. Let's type in 90 degrees. Let's go to the top view, make sure to put that in place. And now let's just scale it down. Kind of keep putting it there. There we go. Now if I want to make this a little longer, I can easily just go into edit mode, select the vertices, and just pull it out. Okay, so there's the nuclear reactor. Alright, so one more thing I do want to make. I don't believe that the New Horizons probe had a low gain antenna as well, kind of like a Voyager did, but I want to put one on here. Now this is going to be really easy to do. What we're going to need to do is create another cylinder. Once again, we're going to turn down the amount of vertices to just 5. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit longer. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is go into edit mode, and we're going to grab the loop cut and slide tool, or just press Ctrl R, and I'm just going to place some more edges inside this object to kind of break it up, just like that. So the next thing we're going to do is rotate it so it is going in the right direction. Let's just type in 90. Now let's go ahead and rotate it from the top view. Let's scale it down. Put it in place. Okay, so now this is going to be the low gain antenna. So we're going to need to apply modifier to this. What we're going to do is go into the modifiers and select wireframe. So what that's doing is fleshing it out as if it was in the wireframe view. So it's taking all the edges and just making a shape around those. Go ahead and let's just play with the thickness value until it looks the way that we want it. Okay, that works for me. So now we have our low gain antenna. And by the way, with the wireframe modifier applied, if you do go back into edit mode, it will show you the object without the modifier on it. Alright, so one more thing I want to do is work with this dish a little bit. So we're going to change the shading from flat to smooth, and then we're going to apply the edge split modifier. There we are. Click apply. Easy as that. So the next thing I'd like to do is begin placing my materials and my textures. Now, we worked with the internal Blender render engine in the past, which is a very good engine, but I want to try changing to the Cycles engine. So you can do that by, on the top here, changing it from Blender Render to Cycles Render. Now, the Cycles render engine works a little bit different than the internal Blender engine, and it can actually make things a little bit more photorealistic much easier. So, the first thing that we're going to do is apply a material for the dish. Now, we're just going to make this a flat white material. So, go to the Materials panel, click New, and let's name this Dish. Now, this layout is a little bit different than the Blender engine, but it really does the exact same thing, it just looks a little different. Now let's go ahead and apply material to the reactor. And let's go ahead and make this kind of like a bluish gray. There we go. Now keep in mind, these are not actually changing colors in the viewport like the Blender engine does. You can control that here actually if you want these to show up as different colors while you're working with them. So the reactor, I'm going to go ahead and change the viewport color to the same as the diffuse color. Same thing with the low gain antenna. I'm going to put the dish material on that. Okay, so if you look at the New Horizons probe, you know that the body of it has this kind of gold foil mylar look to it. Now we're going to create that. So let's go ahead and select it. And then we're going to type in body. Now instead of a diffuse, this is actually going to be a glossy shader, which means it's going to be reflective. We can get a little preview right here. Alright, so in order to create that kind of crumbled up foil look, we're actually going to create a texture and a bump map. So we're going to want to go and pull this up. Now this is the timeline editor for animation, but we're not animating anything, so we don't really need it. Let's go ahead and change that to the node editor. So what we're going to want to do is create a new texture. So in the node editor, we're going to press Shift A, just like we're making a new object. Let's go down to texture, and we'll click on Musgrave texture. Now, the way that we would edit nodes is by dragging these little ropes around. Picture this as kind of like the signal flow of maybe a sound mixer. We go through all these different channels and then end up here at our final result. Now what we're going to do here is we are going to be setting up a bump map. Now what that is when we take a texture that has contrast on it, the brighter and the darker parts, and Blender kind of cheats it to make it look like that is actual geometry as far as working with lights and shadows. So it's kind of a way to cheat your geometry a little bit without creating thousands and millions of polygons. So to create our bump map, all that we're going to do is take this texture, we're going to drag the color output to the displacement input. Now over on the right, you can see the preview of what that's going to look like. Now you can adjust these settings here, kind of change the way that it's going to look. So I'm just kind of moving these values around until I get what I want. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to want to do is on the glossy shader, let's go ahead and change that into that kind of yellow goldish material so it looks like the body of New Horizons. There we are. Now let's also change the viewport shader so we can see what it looks like in the project window. Alright, so now one more thing that we have to do is we have to assign a vector for this texture. Now if we were doing a UV unwrap, then we would have to tell Blender to use the UV coordinates to put the texture on it. But we're just going to be lazy and we're just going to have Blender do the work for us. So when we're in the texture window, we're going to want to click on the vector value, which is set to default. Let's go ahead and change that to generated. Now as you can see here, it has created a new node in the node editor. So it's telling us that this texture is going to use a generated vector outputting to the displacement of the material, while the surface is going to be the color of this. Now just to break up the dish a little bit, I'm going to place some edge loops here in this antenna right around the top, and I'm just going to select the faces around those objects to make them a different color. So if I hold down Alt and then right click, it's going to select all the faces in that little loop. There we go. So Shift Alt right click. Okay. Now let's go ahead and assign those a new material. So same way that we did in the internal engine, where we would add a new material slot, change the color, and then click Assign. Alright, so the next thing I want to go over is lighting in Cycles. It's a little bit different. Now, usually in the Blender engine, what we would do is we would create a new light source, but in Cycles, the way that we light our scenes is actually to create an object, like a plane, and assign it a material with an emit value. Now, we did do this before with the moon pyramids, where it kind of was there for effect, but in Cycles, that is entirely the way that we're going to light the scene. Also, one thing with the Cycles engine is that light actually has the ability to bounce off of other objects, unlike in the internal engine. So I'm going to place a new, just regular plane in the bottom of this in order for the light to bounce off of it and kind of get up under the object. So, make the plane nice and big. So I want to go ahead and scale this light, make it a little bit bigger because it's going to be lighting the scene. Okay, now let's go ahead and push it back, and also let's duplicate that and put another light source right over here on this side of it. Rotate it so it is at the right angle. So now here's our setup. Let's try and render a frame. So we can press 0 to look through the camera, and if we want to move the camera, we can actually press Shift F and use W, S, A, and D and move around this like we're playing some kind of a first-person shooter video game. Let's go ahead and get a frame that we like. And now let's press F12 to render. Okay, so not too bad for our first try. Now we do have to adjust a couple of things. You see how this is really grainy? There's lots of black dots. That's because we actually need to change a value. Under sampling, the amount of samples in the render is only set to 10. Now you're going to want that to be much higher. I'm just going to set mine to 50 for now. Also, I'm going to bring up the intensity of the lights just a little bit. So, click on the lights, go to the materials option. The strength is set to 1. I'm going to set that to 1.5. Now let's go ahead and try and render again. Okay, so you can see from our render result that this looks a lot better and it's a little bit brighter. You can also see the bump map that we applied to the body with that material on it, so it does kind of look like the geometry has been kind of warped. Now this is arguably more photorealistic looking than the Blender engine, so it is really great if you want to make something that you could pass as like a real object. Okay, so as normal, feel free to go ahead back into the project, grab some more angles for it. So this is going to conclude this video tutorial from 3D Creations for Beginners. If you want to learn more from these tutorials, please continue to browse this channel. Also, follow me on Twitter at 3D4Beginners. Thanks for watching.